Welcome to Anchored and Devoted. I am not Pastor Jer.
I am.
Is.
And he's Pastor Joseph.
And today we're doing a book review on what book, dude?
We're doing John Mark Comer's, which we've talked about before. This book in particular, Live No Lie. Full disclosure, we have not received any money to promote this book, to flog it unnecessarily. We are not giving any money to John Mark Comer.
Correct.
We don't know him. If he were to invite us out for coffee, we would probably accept. Wink, wink, nod, nod. But in terms of other books from John Mark Comer that we can recommend, Dave can recommend one other. I cannot because I haven't read any others. So that's the disclaimer here.
I can recommend The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
I've heard that one's good for more than just Dave. So, take that with a grain of salt.
It's a good book on, it wasn't the first book I read on minimalism. And it just takes it from a different slant. And so he uses a minimalistic mindset to look at time and trying to weed out the things that sabotage healthy engagement with God and others.
And that's excellent. But that is not what we're talking about today.
No, it's not.
What are we talking about today? We're talking about Live No Lie. Why? Okay, so give us the premise of this book. Yeah.
Well, the subtitle says recognize and resist the three enemies that sabotage your peace. So there you go. Those are
okay.
That's on the front of the book. I can show it to all those on YouTube. To those listening, sorry. We already told you the title, so there you go.
Now, Dave, you recommended this book to me. I read it after you. Why did you toss this away?
I thought it was good from a clarity kind of a standpoint. It's written by a pastor, and it's clear that it's written by a pastor. It seems like a series of sermons turned into a book, smoothed out by a very good editor. That's not shade, just that's what it seems like.
That's real life.
And the three things he's going after, the devil, the flesh, and the world, are real, and often I feel lost in the you can do it Christianity that seems to be pervasive. The
Harry Fosdick kind of crap.
Well, the health and wellness gospel versus, it used to be just an affluenza gospel. Now it's both health and wellness gospel.
Right.
And so when I read the book, I thought it was good to remember that these are three things that we war against, and that it really is war, and we have to be intentional with a huge understanding or highlight or banners that it's already been won. And so this isn't a battle where we're living through it and we don't know the ending. It doesn't mean that I might not lose today, but I know God has this long term. And so my job is to, one, recognize the issue. And we talked about this in the previous episode. I think there's a lot of illiteracy in our body, and that biblical illiteracy causes us to not see things for what they are. Right.
Biblical illiteracy leads to biblical misdiagnosis.
Correct. Being a child of God doesn't mean I should be immature. Being a child of God, especially as you've gotten through decades, to be in the same space that you were when you were baptized, to identify, publicly as a statement of faith, it's embarrassing. And so I thought the book was simple. I thought it was easy to understand. And yet I also thought it did a good job challenging me to stay focused. And so that was why I recommended it to you with all the stuff we've got going on. I was like, you know what? We do need to remember that we do have an enemy, the devil. That as we look to serve God, we, one, shouldn't go to the other extreme and blame everything on him, but we also shouldn't act like he doesn't exist. The flesh is real. It's always seeking comfort. It's always desiring rest, even when it's had plenty. It's always going after his own passions. And that one for me was that chapter on entitled "The Passions Forge Their Fetters," was the one that really resonated with me because um, often you're told go after what excites you, as opposed
Right.
to go after what God has told you to do.
Right. If you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life.
Exactly. And so it's just one of those things where it was like, a good reminder of no, no, no. There are a lot of things that excite you. Are you obeying me? Like, are you slowing down when I say slow down? Are you speeding up when I say speed up? Are you listening? Are you doing the things that I told you to do? You want the next thing, but you haven't done what I told you to do.
The thing that animates underneath all of that is the idea of lies, which are prevalent in all
Correct.
three of these subcategories. He's saying there's a deceit that we're likely to walk into, to be trapped by, and there's a specific type of deceit that Satan himself will lay the trap for us.
Hmm.
There's a specific lie that the world wants to sell us, and there's a specific lie that our flesh wants to sell us. And I agree. I think the thing that stood out to me most is, even as much as I have um, been impressed by over and over the years the reality of this particular struggle between the world, the flesh, and the devil that
Hmm.
I'm struggling against. It has been so easy for me to lose sight of that and to operate in my life on a day-to-day basis as if the real struggles I have are one of money, misunderstanding, politics,
Correct.
want, hunger, whatever.
No,
It's
really.
a and to really lose sight of what the real struggle is. And if I lose sight of what the real struggle is, number one, I'm going to most likely end up fighting the wrong battles, wasting a
Hmm.
whole lot of time and energy on things that are at least secondary or tertiary to what's actually
Correct.
going on, because I'm distracted, because I don't have clarity on what the mission is, to live in the truth, to be controlled by the truth, and by what the actual conflict is here. Paul reminds us in Ephesians, I believe. He said we don't wrestle against principalities and rulers of this age, but our struggle is against principalities and the powers of the air. We're not fighting against flesh and blood. I'm not fighting against you. I'm not fighting against my wife in a marital conflict. I'm not fighting against my kids in a home conflict. I'm not fighting against my fellow believers in a church split conflict. There's a lie that I have believed, that I've eaten, that I've swallowed. And because I've swallowed this lie, just like Adam and Eve did, I'm operating in such a way that leads to destruction.
Hmm.
And yeah, I need to be reminded of that. So when you recommended the book, it went into a long list of books, A, that you recommended to me, B, that I've read, C, of other books that I have in my reading list. So I think I read this probably a month or so ago. I don't remember it as clearly as it sounds like you do, but that's par for the course, I think, between you and I. I was encouraged, I was challenged, and I was edified in the reminder of this reality. I guess I want to ask you this, knowing what your
Hmm.
answer is going to be. And the author does deal with it. The idea of the devil, the world, and the flesh
Hmm.
in that wrapping.
Hmm.
Does it actually appear in scripture anywhere? Or is that something that we have sort of excavated from scripture? How trustworthy is this as a paradigm?
So in you told me not to turn, but I got to turn so I can
Go for it.
open the book.
I can't believe
Um,
you're doing that.
you told me not to turn, and now it's your fault. I'm trying to get there. Um, in the Manifesto of the Exile, which is before, um, the book begins. It's the the prologue. I'll read a piece to you. So let's see if we can get there. This is on page, well, it's not in page, it's XX or 20. It says, why do I feel so battered and bruised? Why does every day feel like a battle to just stay faithful, to keep following Jesus? Here's an idea, because it is. Our generation has a low comfort level with military metaphors and faith. We prefer to think of following Jesus as a journey or lifestyle rather than a war. But our spiritual ancestors didn't share our reticence with war imagery. They were far more adroit at naming the reality of spiritual conflict than we are today. For centuries, teachers of the way of Jesus used a paradigm that has been lost in the modern era, that of the three enemies of the soul, the world, the flesh, and the devil. They saw the three enemies of the soul as alien invaders from hell and a kind of counter-trinity to God himself. While the exact phrase, the world, the flesh, and the devil, isn't used by Jesus or the writers of the New Testament, the language and categories are. If you've read the Apostle Paul, you know he regularly likened following Jesus to a war. One of Paul's famous sayings is, fight the good fight of the faith. He told the Ephesians to put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes, and pray that their pastor Timothy would fight the battle well. Careful to note that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the spiritual forces of evil, and that the weapons we fight with are not weapons of the world. He nonetheless claims we have divine power to demolish strongholds. This was very counterintuitive language for a church that grew up around the life and teachings of a rabbi who was fiercely nonviolent, who chose to die for his enemies in love, not kill them in battle. There you go.
So let me ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
How can we say that it's the world, the flesh, and the devil if what Mark points out here very clearly and rightly is that Paul said we don't wrestle against the flesh? That seems like a contradiction.
Say that one more time.
In the passage you just read, he quotes Paul saying we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. How then do we keep the world, the flesh, and the devil, the flesh in there in this? What am I missing that the flesh is still a part of this unholy trinity, as he's called it?
What are you missing? I believe that until we step into the presence of God, we are not fully perfected. And there still is fleshly desires that we must be mindful against. Can you put them under the category of spiritual? I definitely say, based off of our conversation for living together, shacking up, yes. And so that would just make it a two arena conversation. I think you have to ask him as to why he chose three. But I can see the flesh definitely being a subset for the spiritual warfare.
I guess I see it a little bit differently. When Paul says we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, I take that meaning there to be saying specifically we're not fighting against other people.
Gotcha, but we are fighting against self.
But we are fighting against self. I'm fighting against my own flesh. This is what he lays out in pretty great detail in Romans 7, when he says, why am I doing the things that I hate, and why am I not doing the things that I know I should be doing, that I want to do? And then he ends it by saying, because of this thing within me, this flesh that wages war within me. And he tells the Romans specifically to put to death the deeds done in the flesh. Right. So I think when we're talking about flesh in this context, what we're really saying is this is our internal desires.
Yes.
For something. It's not flesh and blood. It's not meat and the salt, the wetware, as some people have started to call it in order to sell books and gain notoriety. But then at the same token, we can say, okay, but he also said the flesh, the world, and the devil. And what you just said is we're not fighting against physical flesh and blood. We're not fighting against other people. So how then are we fighting against the world? What is the world trying to tell us that's a lie that we need to fight against if we're not fighting against other people? And I think that the way I phrased that question was a little bit convoluted, but I think it actually gets to it. The world is not the problem. The world is selling us a lie. The world is set up and has a desire for our affection, our affinity, and our obedience, if you will. The world wants us to revere it as if the world itself is God. And by the world, I mean the world system. What we have here in this natural world with the authority that exists in the natural world, this is all there is. There's nothing outside of this. And that's how we need to live. And that's the lie. The lie of the world is there's nothing other than what you see right here. Therefore, whoever gets the most toys wins. Whoever has the most power is king. Live that way. The flesh says there is nothing better than to satiate my own desire. So whatever I desire, don't stop from getting it. Go for it with all the gusto. And the lie from Satan can be summed up this way. You can be God. In fact, you should be God. Whatever he has, he probably stole from you anyway. He's the oppressor. You're the oppressed, and you should definitely rise up and steal it back because you deserve it. Those three lies. You deserve to be God. There's nothing outside of the world other than what we have right here, and whatever you desire, that's what you should get. Those are the three lies we constantly have to contend with and put to death within ourselves, and be passing on that teaching and that discipleship to those who are growing in the faith, whether they're kids or whether they're new believers, because these are the three categories that we constantly are going to be running up against. Give an example here. I want to go relax by the pool because I've had a long day at work. And my flesh says, hey, you've had a long day at work. You desire rest. You should have rest. Satan comes to me and says, hey, you're king. You should get whatever you want because you're in charge. My kids have been cooped up in a house all day and they're bouncing off the walls. The flesh side of me says, I want rest. The Satan lie is telling me I deserve to not be bothered by my kids. And so I have a choice here. Do I go and do I follow these two lies and say, well, I want rest and I deserve to not be bothered, so I'm just going to scream at the kids, tell them to shut up and go into the rooms, and I'm going to take myself to the pool and relax? Because there's also the life in the world. What you have here is all there is. So, yeah, it's okay to toss your kids overboard for today because you need rest. That's legitimate. There's always tomorrow. Sure, it's about relationship, but you can build that back, and your need trumps that reality. Or do I oppose those three lies? No, this is not I need rest. This is I want rest. And yes, rest is a good thing, but God will provide for me as I serve him, and his grace is sufficient for me. And in my weakness, he has proven strong. Do I resist the lie of Satan? I'm not God. I don't deserve to not be bothered. I've been called, just as Christ was, to be a servant to all. The one who would be greatest in my kingdom must be the servant of all. And I did not come except to lay down my life as a ransom for many. And he who's going to come after me must pick up his cross and follow me. And the life in the world, it says this is all there is. And I say, no, this is not all there is. My children are made in the image of God. Not only are they my physical offspring and my legacy in the world, but they're the image of God's. I've been given them as a stewardship for which I'm going to give God an answer. How did I steward this time with them? Did I steward this just in terms of my relationship with them? Did I steward this in terms of what God has called me to do to disciple them? Am I thinking about the eternal impact of how I walk through these next 60 to 90 minutes within my family at the pool? Because on one side is me sitting by the pool, barely paying attention to them, nursing a nice cold beer. On the other side is me in the water with them, engaging with them for play and love to build them up out of my weakness, but out of love for them, trusting that God's going to provide what I need. That's a practical application for me. And that's a really simple example. That's not even some kind of really difficult situation, either at work or at church or in my community or in society at large.
So you're hitting the big conclusion of the book of living honestly.
Well, I'm pretty big on that.
Well, this is living honestly before God and others, and recognizing, as you stated, the truth of the situation and not just the lie that I like to hold as truth. So yeah, that was a good example. I think it was good.
Thank you. I will not lie and say that it didn't come from yesterday. Well, gang, I'll say this. I would recommend this book. I would commend this book. I think Mr. Comer has done a good job of laying his argument out there in a way that is not just clear and persuasive, but it's also winsome. I think it's encouraging, and I think it's full of grace. So I would recommend that you go out and grab it. If you do, let him know that we sent you. It'll mean absolutely nothing to him, but I'll have a chuckle somewhere.
And my recommendation is that you go get it from the library. So there you go.
Thank you guys for coming by. This has been Anchored and Devoted. We have been your hosts. This has been a good use of your time, we promise. If you have questions or if you disagree, please feel free to reach us at anchoredanddevoted@gmail.com. Please share this with a friend. Subscribe wherever you can. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.